Hey, everybody, welcome back to the Maple Grove Scripture Reading Podcast. Last time we were in Job chapter 26, and we were looking at Job's reply to Bildad's 6-verse final speech. And he opened it with some of the sharpest sarcasm that we've seen in the whole book, where he says things like, how you've helped the powerless, what great insight you've displayed. Job is done being patient with all of the recycled arguments. And then he turned to the same subject that Bildad had raised, which was God's greatness, and he just went further than Bildad did. From the depths of Sheol to the suspended earth to the defeated chaos of the sea, covering every domain. And then the closing line. All of this is just the outer fringe, the faint whisper. Who can understand the thunder of God's power? Well, chapter 27 continues that same extended speech that we're in. Job waited a moment for Zophar to take his turn, and Zophar never did. There was silence, so Job keeps going. And this is where the long, interrupted final discourse begins, really, running all the way through chapter 31. So let me read through verses 1 through 12 of chapter 27. And Job continued his discourse, as surely as God lives, who has denied me justice, the Almighty, who has made my life bitter, as long as I have life within me, the breath of God in my nostrils, my lips will not say anything wicked, and my tongue will not utter lies. I will never admit you are in the right till I die. I will not deny my integrity. I will maintain my innocence and never let go of it. My conscience will not reproach me as long as I live. May my enemy be like the wicked, my adversary like the unjust. For what hope have the godless when they're cut off? When God takes away their life, does God listen to their cry when distress comes upon them? Will they find delight in the Almighty? Will they call on God at all times? I will teach you about the power of God. The ways of the Almighty I will not conceal. You have all seen this yourselves. Why then this meaningless talk? So Job starts off by saying, as surely as God lives, who's denied me justice, the Almighty who's made my life bitter. So this is how Job opens up this chapter. He's invoking God. He's saying, as God lives. And in the same breath, he names what God, he says, has done wrong. This is the first formal oath in the whole dialogue. So for chapters, Job's yes has been a yes, his no has been a no. He's stated things plainly. He's been arguing very directly, and he let his words stand on their own. But now he's escalating things, and he's taking an oath. And the more striking thing is who he is swearing by, because you swear by someone whose word means something, whose authority you're invoking, whose judgment you trust. And Job swears by the God who has, in Job's reckoning, withheld justice from him, that's refused to hear his case, the God who let his suffering go on without explanation. And so to swear by the Lord in those circumstances would be pretty unusual. It's like appealing to a judge who's ruled against you to certify your testimony. It takes a particular kind of nerve and really a particular kind of conviction that the judge is still the right judge, even when you think that the ruling went wrong. So he's not walking away from God. He's still swearing by God, even with this grievance named inside the oath. And then he says, as long as I have life within me, the breath of God is in my nostrils. So that phrase, breath of God in my nostrils, that goes all the way back to Genesis chapter 2. Where it says that the Lord God formed man from the dust of the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and the man became a living being. So Job is saying, for as long as God's own breath sustains me, I'm not going to lie. The testimony that he's about to give is carried out by the same breath that God gave him at creation. He's not going to waste it on some false confession. He continues saying, my lips will not say anything wicked, and my tongue will not utter lies. I will never admit you are in the right. Till I die, I will not deny my integrity. The friends this whole time have really just wanted him to confess. They've wanted this confession really since chapter 4. All three of them in all three cycles of speeches have been working toward that goal to get Job to admit that his suffering is the deserved consequence of some hidden sin. Eliphaz was fabricating specific charges to apply the pressure to Job to confess. Bildad kept recycling that same theological framework. Zophar insisted with a lot of intensity that Job was concealing something. And throughout all of it, the implicit offer has been, you know what, confess and you'll get your restoration. Come clean and all of this will end. And Job's not going to do it. He says, I'll never admit you're in the right. The Hebrew here is pretty pointed. Far be it from me that I should justify you, is what it says. It's not that he won't confess to God. It's that he won't validate the specific framework that his friends have been pressing. To say that they're right would be to say that his suffering proves his guilt, that the equation they've been insisting on is accurate, that the system of visible retribution they've staked their theology on works the way that they claim. But Job knows that it doesn't. He's watched the wicked prosper. He knows he hasn't done what they accused him of. He's not going to hand them the confirmation that they're looking for. He says, my conscience isn't going to reproach me as long as I live. And, that's a line that we should look at because Job's not claiming to be sinless. He's never claimed that in this book. What he's claiming is that his conscience, his own internal witness, is clear on the specific charges. He's got nothing to confess that matches what they've accused him of. His property might be gone, his health is gone, his children are gone, but this remains. His conscience doesn't accuse him of what his friends have accused him of. And that's not going to change. Again, he continues, he says, may my enemies be like the wicked, my adversaries like the unjust. And the tone shifts. This is what gets called imprecatory language. It's a wish that enemies would suffer the fate of the wicked. It sounds jarring, and it's worth pointing out that this kind of speech runs through the Psalms as well. Psalm 109 is one of the more intense examples of this. The language of calling down consequences on enemies wasn't unusual in the ancient world, and it had a very specific rhetorical function. It was a way of asserting which side of the moral divide you were standing on. So Job's saying, I'm not the wicked one in this situation. Whatever fate belongs to the wicked, let it land on whoever it belongs to. It isn't me. Then he continues, for what hope has the godless when they're cut off, when God takes away their life? Does God listen to their cry when distress comes upon them? Will they find delight in the Almighty? Will they call on God at all times? These are all rhetorical questions. The implied answer is no. The godless have no hope in the end. God doesn't hear the prayer of someone who's lived in defiance of him. The godless person doesn't delight in God or call on him. But pay attention to what Job's doing here. He's calling on God. He's been calling on God throughout this whole thing, demanding an audience, crying out for a hearing, asking for a mediator, insisting that God listen. It's been a persistent prayer, a relentless calling on God, even through anger and confusion and grief. But that's been evidence about who Job is, because a godless person isn't going to call on God and keep calling on God. A person without hope doesn't keep demanding that God show up and explain himself. The very thing that looks like complaint and accusation is at the same time an act of faith. You don't yell at somebody that you've written off. So Job's friends could have recognized this distinction if they'd been really paying attention to it. But they were watching a man who was furious with God and couldn't stop talking to him. That's not what abandonment looks like. That's not what the godless person does. The godless person stops calling. But Job couldn't stop. That persistence, even when all that calling sounds like a lot of arguing, it's exactly the evidence that separates him from the category that his friends have placed him in. He says, I'll teach you about the power of God. The ways of the Almighty I will not conceal. You've all seen this yourselves. Why then this meaningless talk? So with that, Job turns to face all three of his friends. The pronoun shifts from the singular, he had been speaking to Bildad, to the plural. You got Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar. He's like, all three of you, you know the things that I'm talking about. You've seen the same world I've seen. You've watched the wicked prosper. You've seen suffering fall on people who don't deserve it. You know the equation doesn't always balance in this life. Why are you still talking as though it does? Why then this meaningless talk? That's a good question to end this on. The friends have said a whole lot of things in this dialogue that, are true in the abstract, that God is great, he's just, God punishes wickedness eventually. Human beings are not righteous before God. All of those things are true statements, but applied mechanically to a specific person and a specific situation where it's used to accuse, to pressure, to demand a confession, well, it starts to become something else. It's empty talk. Words that had the form of wisdom without the content of understanding. Next time, we're going to continue in chapter 27. We'll get through verses 13 through 23, where Job is going to take up the description of the wicked man's fate and then turns it back on his accusers. That'll do it for today. Hope you have a great day. Talk to you again soon. God bless.